Hello and welcome to the Action Against Child Sexual Abuse Advocacy Awareness and Sensitization Program on YouTube. Children are often called gifts to a home. And when a child comes into a home, the child happens to spend most of his or her time growing up with her parents. But more often times, you find out that the child gets to an age when the child has to leave for school. And the child gets to spend a lot of time in school, and that is why we can always say a school could be called a child's second home. This brings us to the topic of today's episode, and that is protecting students from sexual abuse. And this, I believe, is a school's duty. And to discuss this with us today, we have a very special guest. She's an education specialist with approximately 2 decades of experience in this field. And apart from that, she's presently a proprietress of the Penielville School right here in Dawaki in Abuja, just across the Ushia Express with Gwarimpa. Gwarimpa is the biggest estate in Africa. And having said this, I would like to introduce to you Mrs. Harriet Asuru. Welcome to this episode, ma'am.
Thank you very much.
It's great to have you around. So without taking much time, Mrs. Asuru, I would just like to throw in to say, in all your years of experience, how often have you seen or heard of any case of sexual abuse?
Talking about sexual abuse is something that happens every day, and then it's becoming quite rampant in the community. Having worked in a school for close to 2 decades now, I would say it's just on the increase. Anyway, in my experience, in my time of experience, I haven't had a clear case being reported or happening where I was working, but I have had opportunity to attend seminars and talk with people outside, and they've shared lots of experiences about these cases. And one thing we know about it right now is that it's on the increase, and then we have to do everything possible, and schools have to do their best to make sure that they protect innocent children from falling victim to pedophiles and all these sexual molesters of children. So I haven't had a clear experience, but I know that it's something that is happening, and schools are actually meant to be doing a lot of things to stop it from happening. And then they should also let the children know that one important aspect of it is that when it happens, it has to be reported. Now, I'd like to talk about pedophiles. Because though we're talking about schools, if you look at it critically, you will find out that there's a lot from the home front that is involved. Because research has shown that pedophiles are never strangers. They are people that are very close to children, and they're either in the home or teachers or drivers, people that have gained the children's trust, and then over time they want to use that medium to do what they really have on their minds.
But to come in there, I also want to throw in like that in pedophiles at the same time, like you said, they are mostly at the home front, but most of them feel comfortable also walking around children. And that's why when we picked up this topic, we said, okay, I'm sure if there are pedophiles or child molesters, definitely a school will be an environment where they will feel comfortable or they will want to be around. But like you said, I totally do agree with you that most of the people that abuse children, of course, they are people that have gained the trust of those children. So
yes, not to cancel out the fact that they're not in schools. It's just that they're definitely in schools. They're always finding their ways into organizations that work with children. However young the children are, say from the ages of 2 to 11, 12. So you find these pedophiles always trying to find their ways into such places. That's a known fact, because for a pedophile, he will always want to be around children. He talks about children as if he's talking about, or she's talking about her adult sexual lover or something. So they're always there in schools. We're not ruling that out at all. And then schools actually have a lot to do in helping to check.
Now, talking about what schools have to do in helping check the system. Now, I was going to ask that, how do schools check teachers, that check the track records with regards to if they've had that kind of experience or if they've done something like that before? You know, we see a lot of schools recruiting. I can say that schools are one of the labor, like they are really driving the labor force now. Everybody seems to, be looking into schools, or wanting to work in the school, because of course they're employing. But now this is so rampant. How often, how do the school, what's the system in place schools have to check or track these, teachers that have been found wanting as molesters of children? What do schools do in this regards?
Oh, yes, definitely. I agree with you. And I'll take the question from the later and then go back and forward. The truth is, yes, most times we schools employ, they don't really think about these aspects. Maybe they're just there thinking about people that are just coming to teach, and then they forget that they have that duty to protect the children. And these pedophiles are all around. When they're found wanting in one school, before you know it, they're out and they're off to another school. So one thing schools must always do when they employ people is to make sure they get the guarantors, make sure they find out from the previous school or wherever the person has worked why the person left. And of course, if during an employment interview you're asking a staff or somebody you want to employ about why they left, they are never going to tell you it's because I was found wanting in this area.
Yes.
So it then falls on the school to check. Okay, so talking about other things that school could do to check pedophiles, the very first I think is schools need to teach sex education to the children, because the child is very important in this case. So the children need to be taught sex education. They need to know the names of their body parts. They need to understand what is appropriate and inappropriate touching. They need to also be told that nobody has the right to touch them inappropriately or take photographs of their body, private body parts. Schools need to teach children about child abuse, the 4 types of abuse, sexual abuse and everything. So, and then they must insist and let the children know that if any of this is happening to them, they should report. Now, most of the cases we're having unreported is because the pedophiles threaten the children not to report.
Exactly.
And then the children believe them and they don't report, and so most times it's being covered. Not necessarily that some schools would know and want to protect their image.
But can I share an experience with you? Now, we used to do outreaches to school where we teach sex education to kids, and we've had situations where we reach schools and then we send out forms, and some parents don't want their children to be taught. So it's a very sensitive matter, and I think there's somewhere in the government, in the policy, where they're pushing for sex education to be taught in schools. I think I've been around it. I wish I did that research before I came on, but since we're here, like, these are things that the government should make mandatory. I think that sex education should be taught in schools, and it should be mandatory. I mean, most times parents want to think that their children should be exposed. Like, I have a 2 years old and a 5 years old, and they know their body parts and they call it by their name. I mean, they call the penis, and they call the vagina, because that is what it is. And it should be enough pee pee and wee wee, all those diseases. So I totally agree with you. And then when you're calling this name in school, I mean, if my daughter happens to be in your school, of course, and then if she says vagina, how do those teachers react to it? It's something I've always thought about, because I know most people, that name is sacred. It's like it's sacred. So how do they react to it?
Yeah, I would say that, I mean, it depends on the circumstance. I mean, teaching in the class, maybe you're teaching your English or maths, there's hardly any reason for a child to just call the name of a body part, except maybe they're in the toilet and something happens, or maybe it's paining them, it's itching them, then they can actually call and say, oh, my penis is paining me.
Yes.
And there's nothing wrong with a child actually calling. For me, it's so interesting to have a 5-year-old like just clearly say my vagina, because it just tells me that this child is being put on the right track.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. That's really nice. And Mrs. Suru, I'm so happy having you on this show, because you're really throwing lights to even beyond where I expected, and I'm really enjoying myself. And I was going to ask again that So, do you think that the prevalence of reporting in schools, because of course we said, like you said, you hardly hear of reporting, of people reporting sexual abuse. Of course, we do know that people don't want to be associated with the stigma and discrimination that comes with it. But in schools, as a school, in fact, I have to share my experience. Yes, I have to share my experience. I know a very big, it's a reputable school right here in the city of Abuja. Very big. And I remember there was a teacher that was found one thing. I mean, he tried to sexually abuse a child in a very big school. And I remember a few months ago, I walked into another very big school and I did see that teacher right there. And one of the things that occurred to me is I said, okay, with these schools, there has to be a system. It goes beyond what the teacher said. There has to be a body that manages teachers, that has teachers. I mean, if you're working in a bank and you defraud the bank, you can't get a job anywhere in any bank in Nigeria. How do they achieve that? I mean, our children are even more important. Our children are more important. I mean, the schools should come together and come up with something that can help be able to track, to put a check system on teachers so that wherever, I mean, you can, this is right here in Abuja. I'm talking about somebody right here in Abuja. He didn't have to go to Lagos to get a job. It was very open, and right here he's working in Abuja again. So I think that's one of the things I think the schools need to really put their hands into. And then I was now going back to say that the high prevalence of not reporting child sexual abuse in schools. Could it be that the schools are doing that because they want to protect their image, they want to be out there that, oh, it was this school, Katamakutu school, that the child was abused, and then everybody takes away the child? Could that be one of the reasons why you don't get to hear that schools are reporting cases of child sexual abuse, bearing in mind the actual case that I was just discussing with you of the Chrisland school, the Chrisland school, the man that was abusing the child, and it was alarming because he was abusing children, 2 years old children. So that's to tell you that they know the right term for face, just like they always say in HIV, they know the right term for face. I mean, he looked so responsible. He was an elderly man. He probably had wives and children, and he was abusing 2 years old. And thank God that for once, even though we did hear that the school tried to cover it up, but for once, we heard it out there. And we know there are so many other things happening out there, and the schools find a way. So that's where I'm going to. Could it be that most schools are really trying to protect themselves at the detriment of a child?
Yeah, I actually think that schools shouldn't, not think, I actually know that schools shouldn't protect themselves at the detriment of the children. And then if a school has a staff that has done that already, it needs to be reported. The latest thing about sexual abuse is that it needs to be reported. You find out that even in homes, people are told to cover it and all those, but it needs to be reported because that's the only way to check. And now, for example, the teacher you mentioned about that is now in another school. I am sure when that teacher was being employed, because what the banks are doing is, if you come for an interview and they're going to employ you, they contact your previous bank and they find out exactly why you left and what caused it, and the banks will always tell the truth. So that's exactly one system that we lack at the moment in the educational sector or in schools. There is really we really don't have that system to check the place where the teacher is coming from, and that's mostly because schools are just poaching. They're looking for good hands. Oh, this teacher is a good hand, and they just take him over, not finding out exactly what happened in his last place. So one way to check that is if individual schools, before we start talking about coming together to form these bodies that can help us check properly, each individual school, when they're going to employ, they need to refer back to the place where the teacher is coming from and find out exactly why they left there. If we could do that, that would help a lot.
I believe that will cover a lot, like having people, the schools respond to this too, because the schools have to be able to respond to other schools to let them know why this person actually did that. I think that's a very brilliant point. And Finally, Mrs. Susuru, in the Western world, we hear so much about the social welfare system, the welfare system checks on the children and picks up the children. Because I just want to know how often in your years of experience did you see this welfare system, our national welfare system? How do they come around schools? Because I know it's one of their duties. Like they have to reach out and make sure, certain things, like if they see certain things, and that's part of, I think, are they part of the inspection schools get?
Politics,
Are they part of that?
assurance.
So,
Okay.
like, what do they do? What do they do to check for child molesters in school? Is there any system they have in place, or is there any system? I'm just thinking.
Yeah.
Curious.
Okay. So, I inspection teams come round. They come around for quality assurance, and they're mostly focused on, I mean, the school as in academics, checking records, checking who is there and who is not there. Rarely checking on this aspect.
Okay, rarely
Rarely
checking on, and
this
this is a very
Yes,
important
rarely
aspect here.
checking on these aspects. But individual schools that know what they're doing are meant to put systems in place to protect their children. And that's why in good schools you have a child protection team.
Wow,
And
that's
so a
beautiful.
child protection team, in my years of experience, is a team, just a few people in a school setting that are really trusted. And so they go for the training, and these people, the children are told to always feel free to tell this set of people anything.
Wow.
So, for example, when I was in my last place of work, I was a child protection officer for my department.
Okay.
And so children tell me everything. So if something happens in class, it could even be within themselves and they're touching their parts or anything, they might not tell other teachers, but they will tell you, because there's that thing that this person will protect you. Whatever I'm going to do about it, I'm not going to harm you. So if schools can, before we start talking about what the government is doing, because we're kind of far from it at the moment.
Very true.
Okay, schools can set up their own child protection teams, and that would help a lot, because the child protection team is the team that now reports it to the government body or to anybody that looks, any organization that normally handles it.
Wow, this is so beautiful. A child protection unit. I think this is worthy of emulation. I think schools should actually do this. Have a child protection unit that actually looks out for children in schools. It's a very vital point. I found it so interesting. I've never heard of it, and hearing of it, it's so elevating. I feel really good about it. And Mr. Suru, thank you so much for coming on this program. We're really happy to have you, and you've really educated and enlightened us so much. I'd like to encourage schools to please always report cases of sexual abuse so that we can hold the abuser or the perpetrator of this act to books. And this is because when this is done, I'll give you an example. The guy in the Chrisland, the man that was found in Chrisland, I don't think he can work in any school. And that is the justice. That's one of the justice you'll be doing to your society by simply reporting teachers or reporting abusers that you found within your school. Thank you so much for being on this episode once more. We're really happy that you listened, and we hope you learned one or two things on how to protect children in schools. Schools that are listening, please, you would have learned one or two things on things you can emulate to make schools safer for children. Thank you so much for being with us on this episode. We do hope you learned one or two things, and for schools that are listening, of course, we know there are a lot of take homes for you. Finally, please like our page and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Subscribing to our YouTube channel will simply mean that you've lent your support to fighting this cause. Thank you once more.